Welcome, dear listener. As we settle into a quiet evening, imagine yourself in a time long past, a time where life was both simple and harsh, where the world was far different from the one we know today. Tonight, we're going to take a slow walk through the medieval world, a place where survival was far from guaranteed, and where the comforts we often take for granted were far beyond reach. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Let us drift back in time to an era where, well, you might not last a day. Imagine you've just stepped into a medieval village. The year is somewhere around the 12th century. The first thing you notice, even before you see the people, is the air. It's thick with the smell of wet earth, smoke, and the faint scent of animals. There's no electricity, no running water. Every home, every building is heated by an open fire, if you're lucky enough to have one. Without modern insulation, the cold creeps in everywhere. The wind howls through the cracks in your wooden cabin, carrying with it the chill of a long, unforgiving winter. It's a different kind of cold. It doesn't just touch your skin, it seeps into your bones. And here, in the medieval world, there's no quick relief, no hot shower to wash the chill away, no thick, cozy blankets made from the softest fabrics. You're left to rely on your wits and what nature provides. Thick woolen clothing might protect you somewhat, but it's heavy, uncomfortable, and it doesn't always keep the cold out. As the night grows quiet, imagine your candle flickering, your breath visible in the air. It's the only light you have. You hear the crackling of the fire, the howling of the wind outside, and the occasional low murmur of your neighbors. But it's not enough. The cold is there, always. It's easy to imagine that in this world you would be constantly struggling against the elements. You might wonder how people survived like this, day in and day out. How did they endure without the simple comforts we so often take for granted today? Food in the medieval era was not like the easy meals we have today. There were no refrigerators, no convenience stores filled with fresh produce or frozen dinners. Instead, you had what you could grow, catch, or trade. The fields were your supermarket, and what you could hunt or raise your personal pantry. Imagine waking up early in the morning, the cold still biting at your skin. There's no breakfast cereal, no steaming cup of coffee to kickstart your day. Instead, you're likely greeted by a thick porridge made from grains like barley or oats. It's filling, but not exactly delicious. It's the kind of meal that sticks to your ribs, but only because it has to.
If you're lucky, you might have a piece of bread with it, though it's likely to be dry and crumbly. The bread isn't light and fluffy like what we're used to today. It's made from whole grains, often coarser and harder to chew. You may also have some cheese or maybe a bit of salted meat if the local butcher has anything left. But don't get too excited. The meat is often tough and chewy. There's no easy access to fresh fruits or vegetables. Those who could afford them ate them in season, but most people went without for much of the year. A diet of mostly grains and occasional bits of meat means that many people suffered from malnutrition, lacking the vitamins and nutrients that we take for granted today. The rich, of course, had a slightly different experience, but even their meals were far from what we imagine as luxurious. Yes, there might be a roasted boar or a pie filled with rich meats, but these foods were often heavy and greasy, served with large amounts of alcohol, mead, or ale, because the water, so vital to our survival today, was often unsafe to drink. As you finish your meager meal, you might begin to understand how difficult it was just to survive in this world, where the food you ate each day was not only scarce, but often unappetizing. But even though food is central to survival, it is not the only hardship people of the medieval era had to face. Now imagine you're part of the workforce in this medieval village. Your job could be anything from working the land as a farmer to being a blacksmith, a miller, or even a town crier. The working day starts before the sun rises and ends long after it sets. There's no break, no weekend, no holidays to look forward to. You're either at the mercy of the seasons or the needs of the people around you. If you're a farmer, like most people, your life revolves around the land. You wake up early to feed the animals, and you spend the day in the fields, planting and harvesting by hand. There's no heavy machinery, no tractors to make your work easier. You rely on the strength of your back, the sharpness of your tools, and the help of your family. The work is exhausting, and yet it's never enough. There's always something more to do. Fields to plow, crops to plant, animals to feed. The cycle of work never stops. If you're fortunate enough to have a skill, like being a blacksmith, you might spend your days hammering away at hot metal, crafting tools, nails, or weapons. It's grueling work, made even more difficult by the fact that the smithy is incredibly hot, especially in the summer. The air is thick with smoke, and the clang of metal on metal echoes constantly. And even if you do find success in your trade, there's always the fear that something might go wrong. A bad harvest, an accident at the forge, or a sickness that sweeps through the village. Any of these could leave you struggling to survive. As the day comes to a close, imagine the weight of exhaustion settling in your bones, and yet you know that tomorrow will bring more of the same, the never-ending grind of life. The medieval world was a place where family was central to survival. Families often lived together in small, cramped homes with little to no privacy. A household might consist of grandparents, parents, children, aunts, uncles, and sometimes even cousins, all under one roof. Imagine the closeness, the lack of space. Every room is shared, and personal belongings are few. There's no such thing as individual rooms. Even if you're a young adult, you might still share a bed with your siblings, your parents, or anyone else in the household. Children were expected to work from a very young age. There was no playtime, no schooling like we know it today. Instead, kids would be given simple tasks around the house or the farm. If you were lucky, you might be sent off to learn a trade, but often education was reserved for the wealthy, and even then it was limited. Marriage, too, was often less about love and more about survival. People married young, usually to ensure the survival of their family and their land. The choice of a spouse was often based on practicality, having children to work the land, forming alliances with other families. Death was common, whether from disease, accidents, or even hunger. Families lived with the constant knowledge that anyone could be lost at any moment. And yet, through all this, the family unit remained a cornerstone of life. It was the one thing that people could rely on in a world where everything else seemed uncertain. Now, let us turn our attention to something simple, yet so essential: clothing. Imagine yourself waking up in the morning, reaching for your clothes. But unlike today, when your wardrobe is filled with a variety of choices, your options are limited. Your clothes are rough, functional, and made from what you can afford, mostly wool or linen. The rich may wear silk, but for most people, those fabrics are far beyond reach. The clothing you wear is not about fashion, but survival. Wool, heavy and thick, provides warmth in the bitter winters, but it can be uncomfortable, especially when it's damp. The smell of sweat and earth clings to your clothes because there's no such thing as a washing machine. You wash your clothes by hand in cold water if you have the luxury of a river nearby. Let's take a closer look. Imagine putting on your woolen tunic, the fabric scratching at your skin. It's not soft, not luxurious. It's worn by everyone, from the poorest peasant to the richest lord. For the lower classes, the tunic is your everyday garment, paired with a pair of rough trousers or a simple skirt. The fabric is thick and heavy, providing some insulation, but offering little comfort. If you're a woman, you wear a long gown made of the same coarse fabric, perhaps layered with a woolen shawl. Your hair is often covered, either by a simple cloth or a coif, usually for practicality, to keep your hair out of the way while you work. For the men, a belt often holds the tunic in place, and shoes are sturdy and made from leather, though they're nothing like the shoes we wear today. They're thick and often stiff, made to withstand the rough terrain of medieval roads. You can't just slip on a pair of sneakers or boots. You wear what you have, and it's built for durability, not comfort. But even with these basic garments, you can't escape the seasons. The cold, the wind, the rain, all of it seeps through your clothes. And when it rains for days. You might have a cloak to protect you, but it's often made of the same thick wool that holds the damp. It does little to keep you dry, but it's all you have. For those who are wealthy, clothing is a way to display status. You might have rich, brightly colored robes, trimmed with furs, and a collection of ornate accessories. You may even have a beautiful velvet cloak, and your shoes may be soft and supple, made of the finest leather. But for the rest of society, clothing is a means of survival and a constant reminder of how little you have to work with. As we reflect on how clothing defines your status and role in society, let's take a slow step into the world of medieval entertainment. Now, imagine you've had a long day of work. The sun has set, the air is growing colder, and the fires are burning low in the hearth. You've finished your chores, and the evening has arrived. But there's no television, no internet, no books to pass the time. So what do you do? In the medieval world, entertainment was a luxury, something most people could only enjoy during festivals or special occasions. If you were lucky, you might be able to gather with others around a fire, sharing stories or songs. But more often than not, the evenings were spent in silence or small, quiet conversations. Let's imagine one of those rare moments when people gather for a bit of entertainment. Perhaps there's a traveling performer in town, a juggler, a musician, or a storyteller. They've arrived with their instruments and their stories to offer some small relief from the monotony of life. You might sit around a fire, eating your meager meal, and watch as they sing a ballad or tell tales of distant lands, of kings and queens, of knights and battles. It's a fleeting escape from your daily struggles.
If you're in a town or city, you may be able to attend a feast or a gathering. These events are often tied to important religious or royal occasions, and they are not frequent. The food may be abundant, the ale flowing freely, and for a moment you feel like a king or queen. But even then, the entertainment is simple. Perhaps there is a bit of music, a dance, or a performer putting on a show of acrobatics. But these moments are fleeting and few. On rare occasions, you might be able to watch a play, a performance based on biblical or historical stories. In larger towns or cities, you might even attend a jousting tournament or a wrestling match. These events were not just for entertainment, they were also a way to display strength, power, and the status of the participants. But for the most part, entertainment was simple, fleeting, and often tied to the cycles of religious life. Church services, festivals, and the occasional public gathering were the highlights of social life. The rest of the time, there was work to do, and the luxury of entertainment was often far out of reach for most. As the evening draws near and the fire begins to fade, let's pause for a moment. Can you imagine the silence, the slow pace of life, where entertainment was a rare, precious gift? What would it be like to live in a world where moments of joy were so few and far between? Religion played a central role in the lives of nearly everyone in medieval times. It shaped every part of life, from birth to death and everything in between.
Imagine walking into a small, humble church, the stone walls cold and damp. There are no stained glass windows to bathe the space in colorful light, only flickering candles and the occasional shaft of sunlight streaming through a small opening in the stone. The air smells of incense, and the wooden pews creak under the weight of the villagers. The church is the heart of medieval life. It's where people gather to pray, to seek solace, and to find meaning in a world that can seem so harsh. Religion offers hope, offering the promise of an afterlife where suffering will be no more. It's a comfort in times of disease, famine, and fear. For most people, life is spent in service to God. The rhythm of life is marked by religious holidays, feasts, and the observance of church services. Every day begins with prayers, and every decision is influenced by the teachings of the church. Yet religion also serves as a source of fear. The medieval world was filled with superstitions and beliefs in the supernatural. The concept of sin was ever present, and many people feared the wrath of God. Church leaders held significant power, and their influence over daily life was immense. It was the church that dictated much of what was considered right or wrong. As we reflect on this deep connection between religion and daily life, we realize that religion offered a sense of purpose, but it also created a heavy burden. It was the lens through which everything was viewed, from the smallest decisions to the largest events in life. As we bring this part of the story to a close, think about the quiet, peaceful world we've explored tonight. A world that was harsh, simple, and filled with moments of both hardship and comfort. A world where survival was never guaranteed, and yet people found ways to live, to love, and to find meaning in their existence. Let's pause here for tonight, and as you close your eyes, remember how different life was back then. Tomorrow, we'll continue our journey through the medieval world, delving into the customs, relationships, and the final days of those who lived in a time so far removed from our own. Now, as the evening grows quieter, let's turn our attention to the customs and traditions that marked life in medieval times. These customs, passed down through generations, gave the people of the time a sense of continuity and belonging. Even as life seemed uncertain and filled with hardship, these traditions were a constant, a way to connect with the past and with one another. Imagine, if you will, a medieval wedding. It's a grand affair, though the extravagance depends largely on your social status. For the wealthy, it's an event that marks an alliance between two families, perhaps even securing a piece of land or some wealth. For the common folk, it's simpler, but still filled with meaning. The wedding ceremony itself is held in a church, with the priest offering blessings and prayers. The bride might wear a simple gown, but there's a certain dignity to the occasion. Family and friends gather to witness the vows exchanged, even though the concept of love in marriage is often secondary to the practicalities of the union. The bride and the groom are not just partners, they are joined for survival, for raising children, and for the stability of their community.
After the vows are exchanged, the celebration begins. Food, drink, and music fill the air, and there's dancing. Perhaps not the fancy ballrooms we imagine today, but simple, joyful expressions of happiness. The community comes together to wish the couple well, knowing that the hard work ahead will require their support and the support of their families. But life in medieval times was not just about weddings. It was also filled with other, more somber customs, especially around death. The medieval world had a deeply ingrained belief in the afterlife, and the rituals surrounding death were essential for the peaceful passing of a soul. When someone died, the entire village mourned. The body was washed, dressed in simple burial clothes, and then laid to rest, often in a graveyard next to the church. A simple wooden cross marked the grave, and prayers were said for the deceased soul. But the mourning didn't end there. Periodically, the family would gather to pray for the departed, hoping to ease their journey in the afterlife. The sense of community was strong, and death was not faced alone. As we reflect on these traditions, we see how deeply embedded they were in the fabric of medieval life. These customs, from weddings to funerals, offered comfort in a world filled with uncertainty. They were ways to mark the passage of time, to ensure the continuity of family and community, and to remind people that they were part of something much larger than themselves. The family in the medieval world was the foundation of society. It was not only a place of love and support, but a necessity for survival. In an age where life was hard and often short, family bonds were everything. Imagine waking up in a small, dimly lit room, your siblings lying beside you. The house is small, cramped, and often shared with extended family members. You're surrounded by the sounds of everyday life, the crackling of the fire, the chatter of your parents, and the occasional bleating of sheep or clucking of chickens. From a young age, you are taught the ways of your family. Whether you are a peasant working the fields, a tradesman learning a craft, or the child of a noble family, your life is shaped by your family's role in society. You work together, eat together, and pray together. Marriage, as we've seen, is often not based on love, but rather on survival, family alliances, and securing wealth or land. The role of husband and wife was clearly defined, with the man typically taking charge of the household and the woman caring for the home and children. But beyond the roles, there's also a sense of partnership, though it may not always be as we imagine today. While women were expected to bear and raise children, they often took part in other tasks as well, from running the household to helping in the fields, or even taking over their husband's business if he fell ill or passed away. The children, on the other hand, were expected to work from an early age. There was no playtime like we have today. Children were either helping with chores at home or, when they grew older, learning a trade. At age 7 or 8, a child might be sent to work as an apprentice or be married off, depending on their social class. But even in such a structured world, there were moments of tenderness, quiet affection, and familial love. Though life was tough, the family unit provided support, and relations within it were the foundation upon which everything else was built. As the night falls and we reflect on the long journey we've taken through the medieval world, it's clear that life was hard, yet strangely beautiful in its simplicity. The era was filled with struggles for food, for warmth, for survival, but also moments of connection, of love, and of meaning. The medieval world, as we've seen, was one of contrasts. There was hardship, yes, but also resilience. There was pain, but also joy. There were rules, traditions, and structures that defined every part of life. Yet beneath it all, there was the constant human desire to survive, to thrive, and to connect with others. As we bring our story to a close, I invite you to reflect on these lessons from the past. The medieval world may seem far away, but in many ways, it's not so different from our own. The same struggles, the same joys, and the same deep desire to connect with others are present in both worlds. Now, imagine we're stepping into a medieval town. The sound of busy streets greets your ears, people haggling over the price of grain, children running past with wooden toys, and the occasional clink of the blacksmith's hammer. Life in a medieval town was noisy, crowded, and full of activity, but it was also very different from the peaceful rural life of the countryside. The streets were often narrow and winding, cobbled together from stone or dirt. The houses were close together, and most of them were made of timber, with thatched roofs that gave the town a unique rustic look. It wasn't the kind of place where privacy existed. Families lived in close quarters, and the noise from the bustling town could be heard at all hours of the day and night. You could hear the cries of vendors, the laughter of children, the neighing of horses, and the distant call of church bells. As you walk through the town, you'll see a variety of small shops and stalls. A baker's shop smells of fresh bread, while a butcher's stall has fresh cuts of meat hanging in the open air. Every day, the town relies on these shops for food, as there are no supermarkets or modern conveniences. Each person or family has their own craft or trade that contributes to the larger community. The church, standing tall and proud in the center, is always bustling with activity. It serves as the heart of the community, both spiritually and physically. The town gathers here for Mass, for festivals, and for important announcements. You can feel the rhythm of the day shifting around the church, its towering presence a reminder that religion was at the center of everything. But life in the town wasn't always easy. The streets, although lively, were filled with the risk of disease, especially in the overcrowded conditions. Plague outbreaks weren't uncommon, and many people lived in constant fear of illness, knowing that a single outbreak could wipe out large sections of the population. Sanitation was minimal, and with the population growing rapidly in some towns, there was always the risk of poor hygiene and contamination. At the same time, the city or town was also a hub for social life. People gathered at the market to buy goods, meet friends, and share news. It was a place where ideas spread, where gossip traveled faster than you could blink, and where communities came together to celebrate important events like fairs, festivals, and religious holidays. But the reality for many townspeople was that they were often at the mercy of their jobs and their trade. Whether you were a merchant, a craftsman, or a farmer, survival depended on your ability to meet the needs of the market, which was often fickle. Famine and drought could make the already difficult task of providing for a family even harder. Let's shift our focus to the knights. The very word knight brings to mind images of brave warriors on horseback, clad in shining armor, charging into battle. But in the medieval world, knights were much more than just warriors. They were also bound by a code of chivalry which governed their behavior, both on and off the battlefield. Imagine, if you will, being a young squire, waiting for your time to prove yourself worthy of becoming a knight. You've spent years learning the ways of battle, training in the art of sword fighting, horsemanship, and even the noble art of courtly manners. The code of chivalry demanded that knights act with honor, courage, and fairness. They were expected to protect the weak, serve their lord with loyalty, and defend their faith. Yet, despite these ideals, the reality was far from perfect. In practice, many knights were also involved in battles over land, power, and wealth. Their roles as protectors often blurred with their desires for personal gain. Knighthood was also a status symbol. The knights were part of the aristocracy, and becoming a knight was a way to earn respect and land. But to earn this title, you had to go through rigorous training, which often began at a very young age. By the time you were old enough to bear arms, you had already spent years learning not just how to fight, but how to navigate the complex world of medieval court life. As a knight, you were expected to uphold the honor of your family and your lord, to protect those weaker than yourself, and to take part in tournaments and battles that would demonstrate your strength and skill. But being a knight wasn't always as glamorous as it seemed. The life of a knight was filled with long hours of training, harsh conditions, and constant battles.
And while knights did hold a place of prestige in society, their lives were also deeply tied to the medieval system of feudalism, where land and power were granted by a lord in exchange for loyalty and military service. The code of chivalry may have emphasized honor and fairness, but the reality was that knights were often just pawns in the larger game of politics. As we continue our journey through the medieval world, we can't ignore the darker side of life during this time: disease. The medieval world was constantly plagued by illness. Without the understanding of germs or proper hygiene, people lived in constant fear of disease, and the outbreaks of illness often had devastating effects on entire communities. One of the most notorious of these diseases was the Black Death, which swept through Europe in the 14th century. Imagine walking through a town or village and suddenly hearing word that a deadly illness has taken hold. People begin to fall ill rapidly, their bodies racked with fever, chills, and coughing. Within days, many are dead, and entire families are wiped out. The Black Death is just one of many plagues that would devastate populations during this period. Disease spread quickly, often through fleas carried by rats, and there were no effective treatments. Without the knowledge we have today about how diseases spread, medieval people were helpless against these outbreaks. Many turned to religion, praying for divine intervention, while others turned to superstition, believing that the plague was a punishment from God for their sins. The fear of disease permeated everyday life. Entire villages were quarantined, and those who showed symptoms of illness were often left to die alone, abandoned by their families and neighbors. The constant threat of disease created a sense of urgency in daily life, as people knew that they could not always count on survival. And while the Black Death eventually passed, the trauma it left behind lingered for generations. As we slowly bring our exploration of medieval life to a close, it's clear that the world of the past was one filled with contrasts. There was beauty in the simplicity of daily life, in the rituals and traditions that gave people purpose. There was the ever-present struggle for survival, made more difficult by disease, harsh living conditions, and the absence of many comforts we now take for granted. Yet, even in this world, people found ways to live, to love, and to find meaning in their existence. The family, the village, the Lord's Hall, these were the places where the bonds of society were formed and maintained. The chivalric code, the festivals, the markets, all of these contributed to the unique character of the medieval world. In many ways, the medieval era was a time of both suffering and perseverance, of hardship and joy. And as we reflect on it now in the comfort of our modern lives, it's a reminder of how far we've come and how deeply the past shaped the world we live in today. As the evening draws to a close, let's take a moment to reflect on all that we've learned about this long-lost world, a world that may seem distant but is never too far from the lessons it offers. Good night.